So everybody here and at home, if you can remember Lee from last March, he gave us a lovely talk on the Nest record scheme. He works with the BTO, as you've heard, coordinating ring schemes, which gives us a wealth of information on how our British birds are faring on an annual basis. So if he's happy still to talk to us, which I hope he is, can we all welcome Lee now, please?
Thanks very much. That was my introduction sorted anyway. I'll just share my
Oh, sorry,
screen.
Lee.
No, no, it's all good. It's all good. It's quite fitting actually because a talk on ringing now, and then Matt Pryor coming to talk to you later on. That will work quite well, I think, because I'm going to be quite looking at the basics with this talk. So quite a few people have been, well, you've probably seen ringing quite a lot on the telly. It seems to be on there quite often these days. Um, in fact, I saw one of my ringing sites at Welney on Countryfile at the weekend, so that was quite nice. But yes, I'll kick off with basically the introduction. So yeah, I'm the demographic surveys organizer for the ringing and nest recording team, which does involve nest record scheme, which basically the whole job title, covers sort of structured ringing. So it's not just putting rings on birds, but it's doing it in a particular way that increases the value of putting the rings on. So I've been working for the BTO for about 17 and a half years now. Most of that time was a recoveries officer, dealing with birds that already had rings on, and now I'm in this role. But I was ringing well before that, and next week I'll be on my 21st anniversary. And in that time, I've managed to ring about 30,000 birds. Although these days I don't really ring that many. I usually give those to my trainees because I'm a qualified trainer as well to teach other ringers. So hopefully everyone can see the nice yellowhammer and tawny owl chicks and the blue tit. And we'll carry on. So in this talk, I'm basically going to talk about what bird ringing is and how it's done. Then we'll go over a sort of a brief history on where bird ringing started and then why we ring birds altogether. And this is what it's all about. So these are the metal rings that we use. So in its simplest form, bird ringing is basically just putting a small light piece of metal that looks quite big actually, but it is really thin and has a unique number and an address on it. So if you basically find a ringed bird or even just the ring, you can put the information on the ring on an envelope, send it off, and it gets to the British or the Natural History Museum, and then they forward it on to us. These days, we do use for blackbird size rings and up, we put the website address on as well. So we can get a bit more technological these days. So each ring number is unique. So there won't be another London ring with ETL662, for example. There's only one of those. There might be another one, so in a different country. So we can duplicate ring numbers, but not the address and the ring number. It's also quite likely that the if it was duplicated, it would be on a very different bird. So, for example, we used to be putting Z and six numbers on rings, and they would go on things like blue tits or chaffinch and things like that. But if you missed one of those numbers off, it would turn out to be a swan. So it's usually a good idea to ask what species the finder thinks has been found. And ringing is organized, done by qualified ringers. So the BTO issues licenses on behalf of the governments. And ringing also doesn't have any detrimental effects on birds as far as we know. That's because if we weren't ringing birds, if we were ringing birds that were harmed in the process of ringing, then we wouldn't be studying ringed birds any well, wild birds anymore. So, and that sort of defeats the object of ringing completely. So we are very careful with the birds themselves, just to make sure they are fit and healthy and all stress is minimized. Okay, so what do we collect? Well, a lot of information potentially, and we can get that information pretty quickly because by the time you are trained as a ringer, there's a lot of information that you just know off by heart. So, for example, in this case, we've got the age of the bird. The age is quite very important to because juvenile birds usually have a lower survival rate than adult birds. So separating those two is very important. And we can monitor the survival of the juveniles over time and then do that for the adults as well, because there are effects on birds that can affect their survival. So a whitethroat, for example, it was proven that due to a lack of rainfall in the Sahel, there was a mass die-off of adult whitethroat. So it's quite important to spot that. And we only spotted that because we were ringing birds. So here you can see on the screen on the left a very young blue tit. That is what we term a 3J, where it has basically just left the nest and is flying around. So it's very young indeed. Um, and songbirds or passerines normally keep some of their juvenile feathers until they breed the next year and then they molt and then they lose those juvenile feathers for adult ones. So in the middle picture, I don't know if you can guess what that species is, but it's a bullfinch. And on the greater coverts that you can see in the middle, those feathers that are tipped with white, you can see three to the right that don't look as bright. They don't really have white tips, and those are the juvenile feathers. So we know that this bird hatched in that particular year that it was caught. We also get fault bars like this white throat that you can see the tail of to the right. And you can see that white line going all the way through. That is indicative of a juvenile bird. Also, the second tail feather from the top should be tipped white, not the sort of the buffy browny color that it is now. So the reason why we have a line going through like that is because juvenile birds grow their tails all at the same time, at the same rate. And if there's a lack of food at any point, there is a lack of nutrients going into that feather, but the feather still grows at the same rate. So you can see there, probably when it had just started growing its tail, it hit one of these sort of famine periods. It could only be a day, to be honest, because that's probably how much it would grow in a day. So it didn't eat much that day. Maybe it rained, and it shows on the tail. If it was an adult feather, and they had lack of food, they molt the central tail feathers and then the next two, and then the next two, and then the next two. So that line would be very staggered. And also, actually, looking at that robin in the bottom right-hand corner now, I can see on its greater coverts, sort of above the primaries, half of those are tipped with sort of an orangey color, and those will be the juvenile feathers. So that robin on the bottom right is uh, is a juvenile bird. And that's partly why I became a ringer in the first place, actually. It was to learn more about birds. Not that I knew everything to start with, but just being able to look at that robin and just go, oh, that's a juvenile bird is just fantastic. The next thing to do that we collect is the gender of the birds. So if it was male or female, so you can see here two siskins. Um, and the one on the left is a male, the one on the right is a female. And male and females do have different survival rates, uh, just because they're open to different predations and effects on them. But also they have potentially different migration strategies. Not siskin in this case, because it has been proven that siskins can travel around together, so the male and female can be in Scotland and then migrate south, and they'll be together in the garden in Hampshire or Berkshire or somewhere. Okay, the next thing is weighing birds. and getting their size. So this would be fantastic if a bird just sat on the scales. But unfortunately, that is not the case. Um, we weigh birds like this. So here you can see a curlew at the bottom that's been put in a tube and put on the scales. So the bird thinks it's still being held, but it isn't actually being held. So it can be weighed like that. We also take the repeatable measurement of the wing length, and that is basically a gauge of size. And that's easily repeatable between ringers as well. So not only the same individual. So if that greenfinch flies 30 miles to somewhere else and a ringer catches it, they can take the same wing length potentially. So with wing length, the measurement of size, and the weight, you basically get sort of a BMI, body mass index for the bird to see what sort of quality it's in. We, as ringers, we're in the privileged position as well to be able to look underneath the feathers as well. So a little blow just in the tracheal pit, where its throat is, you can blow in there, and because birds have got transparent skin, or mostly, we're able to see underneath to see where the fat is deposited and how much reserves that the bird can have. So as I've already mentioned, molt is quite a key thing in monitoring birds. So not only have we got the put the ring on, so the bird is an identifiable bird, not just a blue tit in a tree. It's a particular individual. It's probably best shown on swans in your local park, where if it's got a colouring on it, you know which one's which, and then you can study that or follow that bird much more intently. Um, but we do collect molt, and it's incredibly important because molt is one of the most stressful times in a bird's life and potentially quite risky as well because it doesn't have its full suite of feathers. Um, Molt is necessary, however, because once a feather is grown, it's basically a dead structure. So it is open to bleaching from the sun and wear from just knocking a branch or knocking each other potentially. So it needs to be replaced, and most passerines do it at least once a year. There are a couple that do it twice, but most of the time it's just after breeding. So you can see on the left here, we've got a great tit, and it's replacing its tail feathers in a standardized format. So this was a young bird. You can tell that because the tail feathers, the tail feathers on the outside are the last ones to be molted. They'll molt from the inside out, two feathers at a time. And it's replacing those tail feathers for adult type ones. And they are blue, as opposed to sort of the greeny washed ones of the juvenile. Uh, as I mentioned, so the juvenile feathers are usually lower quality as well. So they're grown very quickly to get the bird out of the nest as quickly as possible, and they have to jeopardize something. So usually there's a few filaments that are missing. So you've got the shaft of the feather, the filaments coming off, and then you've got the connecting ones. And usually the juvenile feathers are missing those connective ones until they're replaced and they grow back as adult type, which are very high quality comparatively. The bird on the right, you can clearly see it's a white throat. And it's going through a molt of its wing this time. This is the right wing. And what it's done, it started molting the primaries, which is the sort of biggest feather on the left. Um, and then it molts to the right, which is the wingtip, and you can see the ones at the end are still growing. And then just before it finishes, it starts on the secondaries. So, and that's on the left side, and then it'll molt those. So the worst thing a bird can do is molt the primaries and secondaries at the same time because it just means a very big gap in the middle of the feathers. We can also look in detail at these feathers. So it's really useful for looking for aging the bird, but we can also look at things like parasite loading and various other things that need to be looked at. Okay, and this is an example, a very good example of why birds have to molt. So this is a chiffchaff. and it's replaced those three feathers in the middle. You can see how much of a better quality feather it is. It's darker, and it looks a bit thicker as well. So it's basically molting towards the right there, and you can see some small feathers that are growing through. Chiffchaffs are quite an extreme example because when they leave the nest as a chick, they'll go through a molt which will replace their body feathers, but they won't replace their primaries and secondaries and most of the tail. So what will happen with that chiffchaff? It'll fly south to Spain, Portugal, possibly North Africa, and spend the basically the winter there in the sunshine, and then fly back and then breed. And then by then, its feathers are absolutely trashed. And that's what you can see with those three feathers on the right. They're hardly doing anything really, so they need to be replaced before the migration starts again going south. And and as well as molting, breeding is quite an intense time. So one thing I really quite like doing is collecting the breeding performance of birds during the breeding season. You can also adapt. If you catch a bird that is on eggs, for example, then you can release that bird quicker than you would normally, if needs be. And how do I know that the bird is on eggs, I hear you think? Um, well, if you blow on the belly of a breeding female bird, you can look at the development of the brood patch, which is this little pink area in the middle, and gauge it, and that is directly linked to what it's doing in the nest. So this bird, so the first stage is when the feathers molt on the belly and then they fall out. And then you've got direct contact between the eggs and the muscles. The second stage is this stage. You can see some red veins going through. So when they start uh, uh, molting the feathers out, they're probably nest building. When they start laying, then they are at this stage, vascularization, where the red blood cells are, or sorry, the red veins are pumping liquid in between the skin and the muscle. And the next stage is when they are sitting on eggs, and it looks like a waterbed. There's a lot of liquid between the skin and the muscle, and that basically envelops the egg much better than it would normally. And then when the eggs hatch, the female will absorb that liquid and it'll look just like stretch marks. There's creases everywhere, and it does look like that the skin has been stretched and then it's gone down again. And basically, that is what's happened. And then the last stage is feathering over. So you've got a few stages there. So if we catch a robin in the breeding season, we just have a quick blow of the belly and know exactly what stage is happening. So how do we ring birds? Surprisingly, it's easier than you think. Uh, up- that obviously bird welfare is paramount, and I've mentioned before, and we go through a lot of training to be able to ring birds. We catch the birds using various methods, from mist nets to ringing birds in the nest, as I mentioned in the previous talk, and various ways of doing it, but they've all been checked to make sure they are safe for the birds. Then we pop on the ring, or if it's already ringed, hopefully, then we read the ring and write that number down. So we don't add another ring or anything like that. Because the ring is unique, that it's basically like a name. So we can read that ring once it's on and then be able to track it through its lifetime. And then we collect all of that information. What I went through just now was the basic details for most birds that we collect information for. There are a few extra measurements that we do collect. For example, if you measure I think it's the wing length and the length of the leg plus the feet of moorhens, you can tell if they're male or female. There's no other way of doing it apart from DNA. And then we release the bird once we've collected all that data. And generally on a mist netting session, we can catch a bird and have it processed within 15, 20 seconds, something like that. And then hopefully the bird is recovered somewhere else, or fingers crossed we catch it again. The recovery rate for different birds does vary wildly. So if you ring a meadow pipit, for example, you're probably not going to hear from it. But if you ring a swan, which is big, white, and dies in public places, then you've got quite a good chance of it being found again. So now I'm going to cover some of the training that we do. So here you can see one of our ringers training a trainee on the art of barn owls. And then we've got the scribe behind writing all the notes down. So, yeah, the welfare of the bird is paramount. So we keep the bird for as little time as possible and get all the information and then let the bird go. I have been on ringing demonstrations before at the bird fair and various places, and quite a few people think that we catch the birds the previous day and then show them and then let them go. But that's not the case. It's usually done on a net round, and if you don't catch any birds, there isn't any birds. Um, but that's more of an educational thing um, for the people rather than this, which is just for the birds. So there is rigorous training, and a ringer to get a general permit, you would be training for you start as a trainee, which is what the T stands for, and you'll be training for about 1 to 2 years probably if you go out regularly. We're talking sort of once a week, once every 2 weeks, and then you can get your permit to ring on your own under the remote supervision of your trainer. And then when you get very proficient, you become an A permit. So the C permit is when you can ring on your own under the remote supervision of your trainer. And then the A permit is when you're fully independent and you can buy rings from the BTO and you can submit data to the PTO as well. And then there's an extra grade, the S permit, which is basically a training qualification where you can train other ringers. And that's what Sam is doing in this photo. Ironically, barn owls are one of those species that is pretty tricky to age. So looking in detail at that wing there. And the BTO ringing permit is one of the most rigorous around the world. So it's quite a respected permit to have. So if you've got a BTO ringing permit, it is possible to ring in other countries as well. Once we've been in communication with the ringing scheme of that country. So there is a ringing scheme for every country in Europe, and America is covered by um, the USGS ringing scheme there. And there's a few other ones around as well. But we mainly deal with the African countries and the rest of Europe. And Europe is linked together under Euring, where we have regular meetings and we use very similar systems and codes and things like that. And there's quite a lot of communication between the countries. Uh, when I was doing the recoveries work, we would regularly get on a daily basis get emails from France saying that one of the British ringed birds has gone to France or the other way around, and we're just exchanging information. So this is a photo of my permit with bits of it anyway to show you how it's categorized. So basically, this each one of those ticks is something you can train for, and here we've got the different capture at the top table. You've got downwards on each row. There's a different uh, either stage of bird or capture method, and then like full grown, which is just a bird with feathers, or a pullus, which is a chick. And then we've got mist net, whoosh net, cannon net, pneumatic net, and net gun. Um, So those last three I don't have permissions for. And then from left to right in the columns, we've got the different types of bird as well as we can do it. So we've got open nesting passerines on the left, all the way down to herons and egrets. The table at the bottom is extra things that are licensed. So no, what I've just gone through just now was the very basic bird ringing, but there are extra things that you can train for that are even more highly regulated than the regular ringing is, and this is all termed with the Special Methods Technical Panel, which means you have to apply for a specific license on each one of those, and it's done on a project by project basis. Um, so I can basically color in all of those different types of birds, but the single noose, for example, actually the neck collar, where we put a colouring basically around the neck, and I've been trained for waterfowl only. But it says waterfowl, but further on in my license, it basically put a stipulation that it's only greylag geese and Canada geese that I can do that. And then I have to report on it once a year and report any issues that I've come across. And if there are any issues, potentially that has implications for every other neck collaring of that species um, that is reported by the Special Methods Technical Panel. So it's
Really? I'm very sorry, we've lost internet.
so here I'm just going to talk a little bit about how to catch the vast majority of the birds that we ring in Britain and Ireland every year. So here is a photo of three of my trainees and one of my ringing colleagues, not miming, but they are actually touching the that put up between those two poles. And basically, the birds fly straight in, aiming to go to a bird feeder, but being intercepted on the way. So each of these mist nets, if I flick to the next one, there we go. You can see that a bit better now. So the netting is quite a soft material that the birds basically fly in from one side. It works both ways. And then gets caught in a little pocket. So you can basically see several long net in this photo, and they will just lie there in the net like you're lying in a hammock, really. Although the birds will be quite confused about what's going on and try and work it out. The ringer comes up and extracts the birds. So it depends on the weather how regularly we extract the birds, but it's basically going around every 20 minutes or so. So it's not often enough to disturb the birds in the area, but it's good enough to get the birds out. Obviously, if it's the weather conditions aren't very good, let's say it's starting to drizzle a little bit, we don't want the birds getting wet, so we go around on a more regular basis. Or if it gets too bad, just close the nets because, as we've said, the welfare of the bird comes first. And here you can see a blue tit that has been caught in the net as well, and it's got a ring on. So not only would we be collecting all the information that we did originally, but now we've got extra information from this blue tit of how long it's lived, where it's gone. And if you do the standardized projects that I look after, then we'll be able to calculate adult survival and potentially productivity as well. Okay, here's another couple of my trainees, and they're extracting the birds from this mist net, usually blue tit and great tit, and potentially a chaffinch in there at the end. Um, so what they're doing now is they identify which side the bird went in, because you have to extract it. You can't extract it from either end because the mesh size a bird can't travel through. So what you do is look into the little hammocky pocket area, open it out, and if you can see no line or no netting between their legs, you know that they went in that direction, and you can extract them that way as well. Then you extract the birds, and this is basically the mist net is probably one of the hardest things to learn, and that's what takes the 2 years to train to get your C permit. is learning how to use a mist net, because the birds have got to be safe, even though it's very safe for the birds when you're qualified. And then, as you can see, once a bird has been extracted, it's placed in one of those white little bags around the neck of the ringer, and they can be separated then, depending on how many hooks you've got, with uh, new birds or and recaptures or different species, depending on how it aids the ringing process once you get down to that stage. Okay, there's two different holds that we use, and the one on the left is the one that we use the vast majority of the time. It's the ringer's grip. And here you can see a kingfisher, lovely little bird. And this bird is actually a juvenile, because you can see it's got dark top to the feet. You can see its toes, and there's a dark area at the top. And it'll be completely orange in an adult. So we know that this bird hatched this year. And on the right-hand side, this is a photography hold. So it's holding the bird by its legs, and because the bird knows that you've got it, it basically doesn't struggle as much as you would expect. Here you can see that tawny owl is just sitting there, waiting for the ringer to loosen the grip, and then it will fly off. So going down to the metal rings now that we put on. So they are varying types of metal that we use. Usually it's an incoloy, a mixture of aluminium and magnesium and various different things, depending on what goes on, or what the bird does. So these are all the different ring sizes that we use. Obviously, it just depends on the size, the thickness of the leg. It's not necessarily the size of the bird. So, for example, you can see there a blue tit at the top, second one down. That is an A ring, and a blue tit, a chaffinch, all take the same sort of ring size. And then it goes down to there. And right at the bottom, we've got the biggest ring that we use, the mute swan and the golden eagle ring. So they're there twice, even though basically you've got the swans and the eagles that take that ring size. There are two different types of M ring. The one that goes on a swan is the same sort of material that is on a blue tit, but the golden eagle one is made out of stainless steel. Um, Partly because uh, if if you put a mute swan ring on an eagle, it could just rip it off its leg. It's that powerful. So and it's very tiny amount of weight difference. So the A ring, for example, weighs 0.04 of a gram compared to the 11, 12 grams of the blue tit. It's a tiny amount, and it's basically like just wearing a wristwatch for us. So very little indeed. And you can see on the right-hand side here, there are color rings that we can also put on. And wing tags is an example on a bird of prey. And there's a very old-fashioned transmitter there as well that we don't use anymore. So every bird we ring has its own allocation of ring size or ring sizes. You can see there in the middle, a sparrowhawk male, because it's smaller, takes a D-sized ring, and a female takes an E-sized ring, which is slightly bigger because the bird has a thicker leg. The one underneath that is an orc special, so it basically goes on a guillemot or razorbill, that one, because they have very strange shaped legs. Okay, and here's a sort of a zoomed in photo. So this is showing you how small a ring actually is. The one on the bottom right is a double A ring, so that goes on wrens, goldcrests, and things like that. Absolutely tiny, um, and it's so small that we can't actually fit all of the normal digits that we put on a ring. So we normally put 7 digits on a ring, but we can only fit 6 on here. And at the top there, you can see a ring from Turkey that they use. And this is basically how it goes on. So it just goes around the leg. And this is a ring from Brussels. And when we get the rings, they come in this sort of format. The large rings come in tens on a string, but the smaller rings for wrens, blue tits, song thrush, blackbird, they come in strings of 100. And basically, they're in numerical order, and then you use them one at a time. And this is how we put the rings on. So we've got a special pair of pliers. We've got two different types of pliers. This is a number one, and the larger one's a number two for larger birds. And this pair of pliers goes everything from the smallest bird up to about magpie size or puffin. And basically what happens, the ring comes in a C shape, goes onto the leg, and the pliers squeeze it until it closes. And then you turn the ring 90 degrees and another close, and it seals it perfectly. So nothing can get in there, but there still is a bit of rotation. So if a grain of sand or something gets in there, it can still work its way out. And we also ring chicks in the nest as well. And I don't know if any of you have actually seen a Dunnock chick, but I thought I might show one here because unfortunately, Dunnock chicks look like the most depressed birds in the animal kingdom. There we go. So they take a B-sized ring. So we put those on. It's just those flanges at the outside of the mouth. They're just downward inflected, so it looks so depressed. Nuthatch, on the other hand, happiest things in the world. They have an upward inflected flange, they look overjoyed most of the time, just to our eyes. And then we've got the larger number two pliers. These ones cope with everything from a pigeon up to the eagle. And here you can see a barn owl getting ringed. Looks a bit like a chick. Yeah, a chick actually that's got quite big. Um, that's one of the things about being a ringer. You get to know how to age each bird, and there are a lot of generalizations that we can do to age birds. So if I caught a barred warbler, for example, I've never had a barred warbler in the hand, but I've got a very good idea of how to age it. Um, just because I know this, I know birds in the same group, and I know how they molt and what they do. Barn owls, for example, you can see you've got the largest talon at the front in the middle. That is usually got a little bit of a comb on it, and it's basically a sort of a growth that sticks out that they use to preen with. And the larger or more developed that is, the older the bird is, up until it's a year old. Okay, and here we've got a Seychelles magpie robin, a bird that I have not ringed or actually seen. But I've chosen this photo because it's got color rings on. So one of the downsides of just putting a metal ring on is that if you were going to identify who that individual is, that bird is either going to be dead or in the hands of a ringer. So by putting color rings on in a unique way, you're able to identify which individual that is. And that matches up with the unique ring number, and then that can be submitted to the ringing scheme. So we know that that bird is alive. So I colour ring wood pigeons in my garden and swans on the river here. And when I'm walking past, I can just look across to see which individual that is, write it down, and move on. Otherwise, I'd have to catch a swan every week, which wouldn't be good for the bird. It's a waste of time. So colour rings can be incredibly useful. Um, so the way this bird would work, the colouring combination, for example, you would have the metal on the right leg above the red, and then on the other leg a blue ring. If you switch blue and red around, then you've got another combination, and then you vary the positions on the legs to figure out which individuals there are. And this is another example of a red shank. And these ones do look like they've got quite a few rings. There are a lot of red shank are color ring these days, but thankfully they've got quite long legs, so they can you can see them at distance as well. And this is a tree sparrow. Lovely little bird. I was ringing some tree sparrows last weekend. And by just looking at this individual, um, tree sparrows are one of is a juvenile bird because you can see the loose feathering on the belly and the head. So it's only just left the nest. And it's got a colouring on there. We can put colourings with two different digits or two or more different digits on there. So we can have individually marked birds without putting lots of colourings on. You can just put one colouring with some digits on it, which is really handy, especially as the metal ring still goes on the other leg. Then I was going to go and start with carry on with the hatching of the ringing scheme in 1909. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner a nice little common tern chick. Yeah, don't want to go too far just in case everyone in the room has to catch up again. Thanks for the message about the male and female tree sparrows. That was a very good question, actually, because you can tell the difference between male and female house sparrows very easily. So the males have got a grey crown and the little black bib. Tree sparrows, on the other hand, can't tell male and female by just looking at them. Thankfully, as ringers, we're in a privileged position to see about brood patches and cloacal protuberances, which are the male bits. And that's only during the breeding season as well, because as soon as the breeding season starts, the female will molt the feathers, and then at the end of breeding season, grows them back again. So that can be quite annoying, actually, I suppose, in the winter time when you catch a tree sparrow and you can't put it to male or female. However, some birds you can measure the wing length and tell if it's male or female from there. Willow warbler is quite a good example. Uh, they are sexually dimorphic, so they're very, very different. Um, although that means that they actually look different. Um, but basically, male birds are much bigger than the female birds. Um, so I think I'm assuming that they're not going to come back for a while. So what I'll do, I'll just talk about the ringing scheme where it came from. So in Europe, the ringing was first organized in Denmark, actually in 1899. But in Britain, the ringing scheme was started by these two gentlemen, the editor of British Birds, Harry Forbes Witherby, and they so when back then we didn't have any mist nets. Mist nets didn't arrive until the 1950s. So all of the birds that were ringed were chicks. And this is the first two recoveries that we had. So the first bird ringed was actually a lapwing, which is why we've got it as part of our logo. And you can see at the row here, you've got on the right-hand side some nice three little fluffy lapwing chicks. And then this is a recovery as well. So the first bird ring was actually found as well. So it was found, caught within a few yards of the place of marking, and released immediately. Although it was 6 weeks old, it was still able to fly. And then the recovery below. These are both of the Aberdeen University ringing scheme. You've got two common tern chicks there. And unfortunately, one of them was found with fatal injuries in Fifeshire. So that was a bit of a shame, but the birds were recovered and reported. So that is good to see. And then the BTO came into it. So the Aberdeen University ringing scheme ended during World War One, but the British Birds scheme morphed seamlessly in 1933 to the BTO when the BTO was founded, and is one of our longest running schemes. You can see on the bottom left-hand corner we've got Tring there, which is where the BTO was. And now I'm speaking to you from the top right photo, the British Trust for Ornithology in Thetford in Norfolk. We also have offices in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland as well. And it's a lovely place to work. I'm actually speaking to you from my desk, so in the ringing scheme for Britain and Ireland's office. So we've covered quite a lot of things there. So why do we ring? So basically, historically, we just wanted to know where birds go and where the summer visitors spend the winter, and the other way around, and where winter visitors go. And so that was the other way around. Right, I'll just sit back here. So historically, nothing was known about where birds go, even how long they lived in the wild. As soon as you've released the bird, you can't tell one bird from the other. So rings are incredibly invaluable for this, and it opens up a massive world to finding out a wealth of information that can only be found this way. For example, by catching, if you put nets up at the same place at the same time of year every year, and you do it the same, then the number of birds that you catch are comparable. So if you catch a lot of juveniles in one year compared to a previous year, you know that it's been a good breeding season, for example. And a lot of our information that we report on these days is because of this. So just to hit the message home that we didn't really know much about birds when the ringing scheme was formed in 1909, there was a question, where do barnacle geese go in summer? And it might be quite strange to think about it, but what they what they knew back then was barnacle geese come to Britain and Ireland in the winter and then they disappear in the summer. And there was a bit of a coincidence because barnacle geese don't eat barnacles, but they are called that because it was thought that in the summer these barnacle geese had morphed into barnacles. So much so that the top right-hand corner, that barnacle is called a goose barnacle. And at the similar time, when after the autumn storms, a lot of these barnacles wash up, and then shortly after you'd have barnacle geese knocking about. So it was pretty clear-cut decision, really. Obviously, that's not the case now, and we know much better on where they go. And as another example, Aristotle thought robins in the summertime weren't looking like robins. They thought they changed their plumage completely and changed into this species, the redstart. Now we know they're two different species, but back then they actually thought um, that they were the same species. Aristotle as robins winter, by the way, in Greece, and then they move off. So it's either one or the other at that situation. So you can see why they thought that, but obviously it wasn't the case. And this is a wood carving showing where swallows go in the winter. And it's basically showing that these fishermen are catching fish and swallows because it was thought that swallows hibernated at the bottom of ponds. Um, and if we think about it, you can see where it's coming from. So in the autumn, You would have lots of swallows flying over a reed bed, and then they would descend into the reeds. Then in the morning you would go there and not a swallow in sight. So you would have thought that they just went down into the water to hibernate. Um, Obviously, we know different now, but the ornithologists of the time did, they tied a little red thread to one of the legs of the swallows. And the next year, they managed to catch the same one. And the red thread was still red. So it couldn't have gone to the bottom of a pond. Otherwise, it would have turned brown. And that was their first inkling that maybe this theory of aquatic swallows was incorrect. So, as we know, swallows don't dive to the bottom of ponds, but they do an even more incredible thing of leaving very early. Once they've gone into those reeds, they leave very early in the morning and they just fly south. All of them just go south and they fly across the channel, through Spain, well, France, Spain, across the Med. Then they fly over the Sahara Desert and then they hit sort of the Congo area and then they carry on to southern Africa. And then they spend a few months and then they basically turn around and come all the way back to those particular reed beds that they were seen in the months afterwards. So if you think about it, which is more likely? The migration theory seems quite phenomenal, but obviously that is what they do. So, um, the other really handy thing for ringing is basically you know how many birds you've got. So when I first got my ringing license, I went to my parents' house and my mum says, "Oh, it's brilliant in my garden. I've got loads of birds. I've got four blue tits, two great tits, and a robin." And I ended the ringing session because once I got my C permit, I could ring in her garden, and I did. And at the end of the day, I said, "Mum, you don't have four blue tits, you have 74 blue tits." And that's just because they obviously, birds take it in turns. It's not the same ones that come to your feeder every day, in a continue and are there all day, but they take it in turns. So there's quite a lot of rotation. So there can be vast amounts of birds using your bird feeders, but you wouldn't know without actually catching and identifying each one. Of course, if they've got an abnormality, like they've got a white crown on a blue tip, for example, instead of the normal blue one, then you can identify that one. But it's not easy, and abnormalities aren't that common. So, from 1909 to the present, things have changed massively. So, we started with a handful of ringers, just two or three, and that happened for quite some years. But now we have just over 3,000 trained ringers. When I say trained, I mean sort of trainees all the way up, licensed ringers, I should say. And I think it's 3,038, actually, to be precise. I looked yesterday. And in that time, we have ringed ju over 44 million birds in that time. So, and then recaught about 7.2 million of those. We ring as the British and Irish ringing scheme. We ring just under a million birds every year. We have topped that a few times, but it depends on what sort of breeding season it has been to how well it's gone. And on the right here, you can see a map of where all the ringers are. So I'll just make that a little bit larger for you. And you can see me there in Thetford Forest, in the middle of Anglia, in the little dark patch ish, because there's quite a few ringers actually in Thetford now. But yeah, a lot of the ringers are in England, and towards Ireland there isn't that many, but it's increasing all the time. And with all these ringers, there is an increased chance of a ringer catching your bird, which is really quite good. So in Thetford Forest here, for example, we get a lot of siskins in the forest in the winter. And a lot of those, some stay to breed, but a lot of those go up to Scotland to breed. And in Peebles in Scotland, in particular, there's a ringer there that does siskins en masse, and he catches a lot of our Thetford Forest siskins. But siskins move around a lot, so we've even we've even had a siskin come from China, which is incredible because it's not even in the same flyway as us. Because most of our birds, as you probably know, they are in sort of our country and then they move down to Africa. It's north-south thing, not east and west. We do have a few other ringers abroad as well that have trained with the British and Irish ringing scheme and have moved abroad. And some of those actually use rings that have the BTO address on, or the Natural History Museum address, and use those. Usually those locations that have been British in the past, sort of like um, Bird Island in the Pacific, for example. Okay, so we've come a very long way since those early days, and you can go to the BTO website to have a look on how many birds are ringed and keep up to date with that information. So here you've got a little snippet from the 2016 totals for British and Irish ringing scheme. If you're wondering, the Channel Islands have their own ringing scheme, so don't have to worry about those. But we do correspond with them very regularly because they do ring a lot of gulls and they come to Britain for the winter. So yeah, feel free to have a look. Just Google online report and you should get it. As I'm talking to you, you'd probably be very interested in the totals for Berkshire. And as you can see, just like most other counties, sorry, blue tit is the most ringed bird. So in the left-hand column, we've got the species, then we've got the number of chicks that are ringed. So interestingly, very few chicks are ringed apart from blue tit and grey tit in Berkshire. It would be nice to see a few other of those. Ringing chicks is really useful because we know exactly how old it is and exactly where it's come from, and you can measure the uh, dispersal of the juveniles much better. Then we've got the juveniles, then the adults, then the unaged. So those unaged birds, like I was mentioning with well, actually, that probably was missed out. The tree sparrow, they do a complete molt. So when the chicks leave the nest, they basically go through a molt that replaces all of their feathers. They don't keep any juvenile ones. So you can't actually tell a juvenile bird from an adult bird once they've all done that molt. And long-tailed tit is another one of those species which molts completely. Most of the birds, when they leave the nest, they've haven't got enough time to do all their feathers. They usually do their body feathers, which is their body and head and their back, um, and a few of the sort of feathers at the top of the wing, the median lesser and lesser coverts. But rare, they don't do their primaries. Okay, so moving on a bit. Oops, sorry. Um, this is quite an interesting slide showing where birds go of three different species. So these are all the recoveries that we've had until fairly recently. So you can see all the brown dots all the way down South America and North America. Those are Manx shearwaters. And what happens with them, their migration, is that they breed on Welsh or Scottish islands, and then they leave and fly out into the Atlantic and basically go and sort of follow the Spain and Portugal peninsula there around Africa, around the Gambia, and then they fly straight down for really good feeding during the winter off Brazil and Argentina. And then when it's time to return, they basically go north, but they don't come straight back. They move around to North America and then they nip across. And then we've got the red spots, which are swallows, and that clearly marks their migration, which is excellent. Apart from obviously, there's nobody to find um, the ringed birds in the Sahara Desert, or very few anyway. So we don't get very many recoveries from there. And then we've got the fieldfare, so a winter visitor that goes back to Scandinavia and Russia for its summer holidays. And this is quite a slide. So this is a map of all the recoveries that we've had up until fairly recently, and these are birds that are encountered, they're either ringed or found in our country or countries. So you can see how much Britain and Ireland interact with bird populations all over the world. You can clearly see the Manx shearwater ones that we were talking about in South America. And in Africa, a lot of our migrant warblers go down there. And we've got a few to and Australia as well. That's very rare. But Arctic terns do go down there. And then we've got ducks that um, get shot in Canada and America, as well as Russia. And the woodcock in particular, we've got a lot of recoveries from woodcock. If you can see Israel down there on just above North Africa there on the right, a lot of those are going to be lesser whitethroats because that is one of the species that does make that migration route as opposed to going sort of to the west. So a really interesting slide. So historically, going back, we basically wanted to know where birds go and where they come from. But now things have moved on massively. And now we're able to monitor how long birds live and monitor their breeding success as well. So the Manx shearwater that I mentioned just now, they can easily top 40 years. And I remember catching puffins when I was 35, and I was catching puffins that were older than I was. So that was phenomenal. And when we're doing all of our ringing in the standardized ringing that I look after, we report on the changes of bird numbers for juveniles, for adults, and their productivity on an annual basis. So we can look at changes due to the weather, the climate change, and various things like that. So reasons why they are changing um, changing in number. And we're also tracking migration routes with technology. So tracking migration can be difficult because the bird is alive and then it's either caught by a ringer, which is fantastic, or it's found dead. And obviously the migration doesn't continue after it's been found dead. So using technology that is still alive, so we can track the birds. So here's an example of how long birds live. So here we can see on the left George Dunnett, who went on an expedition and caught this fulmar and ringed it and then let it go. So on the right, you can see the same George Dunnett 40 years later, and he's aged a little bit, you can say. Um, the bird that he's actually looking at is exactly the same bird that he ringed 40 years, 10 months previous. And that bird looks exactly the same. They can live to be very old, probably about 45, I would think, for a fulmar. Um, and the bird, because the bird molts its feathers once a year, it looks exactly the same and doesn't weather the same as us. Um, because I was a recoveries officer back in the day, it is interesting to find out what happens to birds. Obviously, a lot of birds are killed by cars, killed by cats, they hit windows and things like that. But I've pulled out some quite interesting recoveries that you can have a think about. So there we go, the Nile crocodile. And we've had a recovery of an osprey in the osprey ring in the stomach of a crocodile in the Gambia. So that was fascinating. And then we've got tiger. And as you probably guessing, India doesn't normally feature in our flyway. So any birds that are ringed or found in the UK don't really go to India or Asia. So the chance of a tiger recovery is incredibly slim unless you're a mute swan. Mute swans don't travel very far. It's quite interesting well, it's quite notable if a mute swan travels more than 20 miles once it's an adult and has a territory. And a tiger killed a mute swan in Chester Zoo. It basically just flew in, landed on one of the ponds in the tiger enclosure and got nailed. So we had a report of that. There we go, another spider. So spider recoveries. Um, Obviously, spiders are normally bird food, but not when you're in Guinea-Bissau, where the spiders are much bigger than the birds. So in this case, a reed warbler with a ring on was found in the jaws of one of these very big spiders. And an animal that you don't think would normally kill a spider, not that you would think a spider would, sorry, kill a bird, are cows. Cows are one of those species that are the arch enemy of swans. So, especially when they're in a crowd like this or a group of bullocks, they can just be so inquisitive, it accidentally trample the swan. So we do get recoveries of those. And unfortunately, birds and bulls usually don't mix. And we've had quite a few recoveries because we've been operating this ringing scheme since 1909. We've had a lot of time to acquire all of these recoveries, and golf balls flying through the air do knock out quite a few birds. And here we have black-headed gull is usually a common casualty. We've had oyster catcher, mute swan, kestrel, sand martin, mallard, Canada goose, and tawny owl. Um, I did have one recovery once of a fighter pilot was flying over Wales, and he basically uh, hit a bird, and when he landed, checked the engine and found a head of a red kite and a leg with a ring on. So, like the good person he was, he reported the ring to us, and we got the report. The downside was we couldn't pin it to a particular location because it only took him 10 minutes to travel across the whole of Wales. So it was quite phenomenal. This Arctic tern is also worth a shout out. So we do ring quite a few Arctic terns, and they are absolutely amazing. So this is one of the very few birds, well, this is probably the bird, these species that spends most of its life in daylight because it comes to the northern hemisphere for the summer and then the southern hemisphere for the winter. And it basically does a 20,000 mile round trip just to get enough food to feed on. That's migration strategy. So a really amazing bird and very painful if you've been to the Farne Islands. So now we're going to move on to technology, and I'm going to cover quite a few different types of technology that you might be interested in. So not only do we have to put the metal ring on because that makes the individual unique, but we can also add technologies as well. As you probably saw from my license, they are highly governed and uh, investigated to make sure that any device that we put on a bird is safe and doesn't impede the bird in any way. So that is done and managed by the Special Methods Technical Panel here at the BTO, which is a selection of ringers that are specialized in particular areas of bird ringing and tagging. So in this example, we have got a radio transmitters. So a radio transmitter is a tiny little device with an aerial on the back, and you basically attach it, usually either glue mounted, which falls off after a while, or harness mounted onto the bird. And in this example, it was put on bittens. Partly because you can't really see bittens, so colorings wouldn't be useful. But a radio transmitter is very handy. So this person here is using an aerial to triangulate where the bird is in a particular part of the reed bed. And here you can, by knowing where the bittern is, you know where the best areas are for feeding, for example. So you can manage your reed bed on the benefits to the bittern, which have increased in number massively since more has been understood about the bittern's breeding biology and what it and its behavior as well. And this bird can be tracked throughout the day, or bitterns could be tracked. So it can be very informative. The downside of radio transmitters, however, is that if the bird goes out of range, which isn't that far, then you don't know where it is. So here's the bittern, just on the edge. Ironically, we can see it in this picture. Geolocators are one of those devices that collects data when you are not near the bird. So geolocators work by looking at recording daylight, basically, and light levels. So if it records the time of dawn and the time of dusk, you can actually figure out where it is using a program, where it is on in the world, apart from if it's on the equator, where day length is equal. So what you can do is attach a tiny little chip like this to a color ring and on the leg, and then let the bird go. The downside of this type of device is that you have to catch the bird again to download the data because it's an archival tag. It doesn't transmit the information, partly because it's so small and so light. So geolocators, since this photo's been taken, geolocators have advanced massively. And not only do they record the light levels to give a location, but they can also have extra devices inside that record salinity. So you know if it's just sitting in fresh water or salt water, or if basically if it's wet or dry. So you know if it's a seabird when it's flying or when it's sitting. Um, and then you can also put depth sounders in there as well. So you can record how deep a bird goes. So a massive amount of information. And can be incredibly useful if you can catch it again. Thankfully, um, a lot of the birds that have been used this tag are very site faithful. So either they're breeding in a colony like a guillemot or a razorbill, or like one of these waders, like the greenshank in this case. They are very winter site faithful, so they can fly away for the summer and then come back again the next winter. So a lot of information can be gained by these. So even newer technologies, so things have moved on since then. Um, one of the downsides of technology is that to start with, it's really big. So if we put something really big on a bird, it wouldn't go anywhere. So, and it wouldn't act in its natural state. So thankfully now technology has improved massively and all of these technologies have been miniaturized. So on the bird on the left, we can see a cuckoo with a satellite tag on it. And I managed to tag this cuckoo, so I've got the qualification to put satellite tags on cuckoos. So what happens with this tag, it's got two solar panels on the back, so continually charges when it's in sunshine. And then every 2 days or so, it can transmit a signal to a satellite to say its location, its temperature, its movement, and its battery levels, as well as a few other things, which really improves our knowledge. The bird to the right, a swift, uh, because basically they're in the nest box and then they fly out and then they don't land again, there's very little chance of getting recovery. So we didn't know much about these birds until now when we've been able to add devices to them. This is a halfway house between a geolocator and a satellite tag. So it does collect a lot more information than the geolocator does, um, but can be very useful and informative. The lesser blackback gull to the right, that is got a tag on it that doesn't transmit to signal to satellites, but it transmits to the phone network. So as long as it's in range of a phone signal, it can transmit all the information along that to us at the BTO or whoever's the scientist that's doing it, and download that information so they can track these birds when they get a hit. And the bottom bird is a nightjar with a very similar tag. And that technology has only been available for the past few years. And we've been able to track the birds to Africa and back. So as I've got much more of an interest in cuckoos because I tag them every year, that is basically my May. And this is a map of all the recoveries that we knew about for cuckoo. So these are encounters outside of the country. So these birds were in the UK and then moved out of it, or the other way around. So we've had a lot of our cuckoos that either ringed as chicks or caught as adults and where they've gone. This doesn't contain any satellite images. And this is basically even up to 2010. This is what we knew about where cuckoos go. So you can see incredibly limited. You would assume that they went to France, but that is obviously not the case. Um, and the furthest south you can probably see is in Cameroon in Central Africa. So there was one recovery just down there, and that's all we knew about up until the time that we started tagging. And you might be, well, it's very interesting to know actually, but that recovery in Cameroon the ring was put on a nestling, so a little chick in the nest on the 23rd of June 1928 in Slough. I think it was Park Hall in Slough. And unfortunately, it was shot in Cameroon 2 years later. So the bird had traveled at least 5,369 kilometers in 1 year, 7 months. Yeah, that's basically all we knew at the time, which is a great shame. But things have moved on massively thanks to the tagging of the cuckoos. And you can actually go to the BTO website now and look at the current information. So this is a clip from 2018, but I was tagging birds last May, and they're still in Africa at the moment, but you can actually see where they are. So they update every couple of days or so. And who'd have thunk it? They actually go to the Congo rainforest, uh, all of them. They do two different routes. They can either go through Italy and straight over the Med there, and then straight over the Sahara and down, or they can go a western route where they would go through Iberia and then straight into Morocco sort of area, and then over the Sahara, and they work their way round, and then they still winter in the same place. It has been looked at because we've just about tagged over 100 male cuckoos now. So we've got a very good idea of how they do it, where they go, and what's better for them or not. Turns out, if you go through Italy or Malta, you've got a better chance of survival than going the much longer route of going through Spain and Portugal and going round that way. So it's an amazing project and it's fascinating. And it's also really nice if you're the ringer to go online and see where the bird that you've ringed is. That's on a personal note. Um, but it's really phenomenal that you can actually follow these individual cuckoos to such an exact point because the geolocators that I mentioned previously on the green shank, they can record within several hundred sort of miles. But cuckoos, on the other hand, satellite tags are much more exact, and they can potentially go within 10, 15 meters of where the bird actually is. And once Springwatch, I think it was Springwatch, with Chris Packham, went to see Chris the cuckoo in Africa, and they managed to look at the website, figure out where the bird was, and actually go and see it, which was phenomenal. So there we go. And that's the rest of my talk. So thank you for listening. And I hope everyone back at the university heard all of that. But If not, you guys at home did. So, um, if you like, I could take any questions. I think you might have the powers to unmute yourself and say something, or put a message in the chat. Ah, thanks very much, Amanda. That's lovely. Beautiful little birds, the puffins. Um, I ringed several hundred when I went to Salisbury, but they are absolutely vicious. Normally, a bird with a bigger beak is more gentle. Blue tits are probably the worst. They really bite and defend themselves. But puffins, they've got a serrated bill, really clamp down on it, and yeah, very painful. They've also got basically talons for digging out their burrow, so they scratch like crazy. So yeah, thank you very much. If you can figure out to
Oh, Lee,
unmute.
thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
You can. You can.
I'm
Lee, thank you. That was absolutely tremendous. I'm sure a lot of us have learned a lot of things. I have, and even the ringers here possibly have learned something new. I don't know. It was absolutely riveting, and thank you for your perseverance because it must have been frustrating for you as well. And I'm sure we're all really grateful to you. I've had a lot of people coming already. It is. It, it was very broken up
Yep.
our end, I'm afraid it was, but I'm sure we got the main gist of it. And in fact, it has been recorded, so we can go back and watch the recording. And I will. I just thought it was the most lovely talk, and I'm sure everybody here agrees. Does
Thank you.
anybody here have a question for Lee? Anybody? No?
Have I covered everything?
Yes. Yeah. Hang on one moment, Lee. Apparently not.
Ah,
To what extent are the rings found to be annoying? Do they actually sort of try and peck at them and try and move them?
I'm really sorry. I can't quite hear you.
To what extent do the birds find the rings annoying? Do they try and peck
Right.
at them to remove them?
Okay.
And like new technologies on the back, again,
Right.
the evidence to show
Okay.
that is annoying for a while until they
Okay.
get used to it.
So we are being asked, to what extent do the birds find the rings annoying? Do they peck them? Do they try and get them off? And also, has new technology made it any better? Well, I presume it has, but can you answer
mm. Yeah, that is a very good
that
question.
one?
And yeah,
Hello?
hello, hello, I'm
Oh,
back. Um,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, I can
yeah.
answer that. That's fine. So it's really hard to tell, to be honest, in the fact that it would be lovely to ask a bird and would know about it. Um, I I've only got my feelings about it. They do occasionally peck their ring, especially when you've just put it on. So swans can do it. It's probably like when you've just put a wristband on and you notice it a bit more. But after, well,
Yeah,
it's a very short
yeah.
amount of time actually. Birds just ignore the ring and they get used to it. Especially, obviously, if you put the ring on a chick, they don't know any better. I've actually ringed a lapwing chick where its leg was just sticking out of the egg, and pop a ring on, and that bird just wouldn't have known anything different.
Wow, wow.
Um,
No.
Obviously, the technologies, the metal ring is always the same, but technologies have improved quite a lot. So we used to put tags on, and they used to stay on there for life. But now we can attach weak links and various things like that that makes the tag fall off. And then the bird, we've collected our data, and then the bird just carries on its life, obviously with the metal ring on, so we can track it again if needs be.
Okay, thank you. I used to watch the ospreys that have been ringed up at Lochgarten, and I was always worried about the things they put on their backs because I think it was like a harnessy thing, and the aerial would be sticking out. The aerial, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 inches or something, and that used to worry me. I used to think, well, perhaps suppose it got more. Are they more compact on an
Uh,
osprey, say?
yeah, they are. The tags will be smaller, and the aerial potentially could be smaller as well. Um, but the way it's basically, you know how comfortable a rucksack is. So that's basically how we put it on the bird as well. So when I'm tagging a cuckoo, it it basically we weave it in between the feathers. So it's really snug, it's not tight, and it's not loose. So obviously, the last thing we want is the bird to move and get snagged in itself, like catch a foot or something like that. The aerial basically
Mm.
it goes down the back of the tail because it follows the line of flight. And sometimes, most of the time, it gets preened like all the other feathers do. So if it snaps off, then it's a bit less sensitive to transmitting the data, but it still works.
Right.
So
Right.
it's absolutely fine for the birds, and this is what the special methods technical panel's all about. If there have been some
Okay,
technologies
thank
where
you.
the
And I
birds
think
have
there was another
reacted.
question from someone called Mariana. It's gone from my screen. There have been two questions on Zoom, I think,
Oh yeah,
Lee.
yeah,
Mariana,
uh,
was it Mariana?
yeah. I've got Colin Wilson to
Oh,
start
okay.
with.
Right.
And he says, we've tagged male cuckoos. Why not females? And that's a good question. Females are lighter. So the tags that we were putting on could only be put on quite large males. So we didn't do females. We also decided after this, when the tags got lighter, we thought we'll just continue with male cuckoos because that increases the sample size. So we've got a really good idea of what the males do. It is very likely that we will start doing females. Now the technology improves. But unfortunately, we did try some very small tags on cuckoos, and they were so small, the feathers covered the solar panels. So we didn't get any information. Um, so there's going to be a halfway house there somewhere. So it's likely we'll start doing the females in due course. And
Okay.
there was Mariana. I'm just reading the question now.
Yeah.
So the question is, if we notice a bird that we've trapped that is poorly, or gets poorly, an individual gets poorly during the act of ringing, how do you proceed? Secondly, would there ever be an occasion in which we have too much ringing happening? There are controls on the ringing initiatives, or even local people responsible for it. So the BTO will be in charge of the ringing. So we manage that. And what we've got, because we were ringing originally, we've got a good idea of migration, although migrations do change. So blackcaps now come here for the winter. They're not staying over, they're coming from the continent. So without ringing, we wouldn't know that. And that's a recent change, potentially the start of speciation, but that's a different subject. So they're probably Oh, there probably wouldn't be an occasion when there's too much ringing happening. However, um, it could be targeted in a much better way to get the most amount of information out. So, are blue tits in Ireland doing something different to England, for example? Could be really interesting. And as welfare of the bird isn't impacted, it's not too much of a problem. Although, if I ringed in my garden constantly, during the breeding season, for example, that's not advised because I'm not learning anything extra. So I there are bird welfare things with that. And working up towards the poorly bird, that is a very good point. Um, Ringers aren't vets is probably the start of the answer. So we aren't able to treat birds legally. We have got a ringing license to catch wild birds and monitor them and release them. If there is a bird that is poorly, let's say it's got trichomoniasis, so it's very weak and it can't fly very well, then we have to take it into captivity and take it to a vet, which we can do. So that's fine. How's that sound?
Yep, that's great. Thank you. And I've got another question here.
Yeah, there was a good slide which showed that since 1909, 44 million birds have been ringed and 7.1 million recovered, which is about 1 in 6.
Sorry, I've got to try and repeat this back to him. Can you hear the question, Lee, when he's asking this question?
I heard the first half, 44 million birds are ringed, and then
You did hear
yep,
that. Great. Okay.
then I lost connection.
Well, that's because I shut him up.
Data, 1 in 6 birds are recovered.
1 in 6 birds are recovered.
There are two questions. One is, to what extent are the same birds recovered more than once? And the second is, over that time period, is a higher proportion of birds being recovered today because the technology is superior?
Did you catch those questions?
Yeah, I got most of that. I did cut out again, but I think I've got the gist. So that hang on, where's the slide? That one. 7.2 recaptures. I believe those are unique birds. So they were ringed and then recaught at least once. The recapture rate for different species in different locations are very different. So the swans that I colouring just down the road on the river here, they get reported, well, they get reported daily, basically. But meadow pipits or even things like goldcrests, the average lifespan of a goldcrest is just over a year. So you'd have to ring quite a lot to get a recovery of one of those. Um, so it all depends basically on where you are as well. We've got the puffins can live for a long time. So you could be catching those every 10 years, for example. But if it was a goldcrest, that you just wouldn't get any recaptures if that was the case. Um, did I cover most of the question? Feel free to add in any that I've missed.
The second part, presumably today with more ringers and better technology, is the recovery hit rate better than it was when ringing started?
Oh, yes. Yes, it's massively better. Back in the day, the all the records came in on paper, and the recaptures weren't really recorded as well as they should have been. Now, all the ringers are obliged to report their recaptures as well as their ringing records. So, as well as all these technologies as well. So, if you've got a black cap, for example, that's got a let's say a gull instead. You could set the tag to transmit every 20 minutes. So we can load those in as well, getting amazing amounts of data. So much so that if we put in all of the tag data into our database, it would be massively filled up. So that's stored in a different place. So that's just the recaptures. How's that?
Yeah, that's great. Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you. One more quick question, and then we must finish.
The 75 blue tits in your mum's garden, what was the time period for recording those 75?
Oh, that's a
Could
good.
you hear the question?
Yep, I did.
Yeah, yeah.
I was ringing from. I think I ringed from 7 o'clock in the morning till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that. But we can have
Just one
mornings
day?
where, like,
One day.
oh, just one day. Yeah. I was actually ringing. I went to one of my ringing sites at the weekend at Welney, and we put some nets up, and in 3 hours we caught 150 birds. Some of those that we ringed as chicks, which was amazing. But when we're trained as ringers, we get to be able to manage the situation. So you get your A permit when you can run a session, basically. And then you've got to factor in weather conditions, how many birds you're potentially going to catch, what you're going to do if something happens, and basically just make sure that the welfare of the bird is paramount. So I had a big team, I had a qualified team, and we got through those birds really quickly. So it was really handy.
That's great. Okay, I think we need to stop there. Lee, thank you again, 1,000 times. It's been absolutely fabulous. Obviously a bit of a shame that we had some breaks, but I'm sure we all got the gist of the thing. It was absolutely lovely. Lovely illustrations. So we would all, I'm sure, like to thank you very, very much for, as I say, persevering.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, thanks. I love your enthusiasm. Brilliant.
Yeah, that really was lovely. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay.